This is a Figure 5 Media audiobook. The Addams Family Chronicles, a novel by Eric Adams. Chapter 7, Soiled Trench Coats. The late 60s were a time of turmoil, especially in the stomach of a 6-year-old boy riding with his family in a 1966 Fairlane 500 sedan on a fairly typical Saturday morning shopping excursion in northeast Oklahoma. The November air was heavy with the humidity that follows a cold rain common to the winters in Oklahoma, and puddles adorned the pavement, which allowed for a familiar, cacophonous song as the tires of the car splashed through the water on the highway. An intermittent scrape of the windshield wipers completed the chorus. The drive from Jay to Miami up US 59 is a pretty straight shot. Although Tahlequah was closer, it didn't offer the variety for Yuletide gifts necessary to satisfy expectant faces on Christmas morning. Miami, a bustling city of 14,000, had a Walls department store, the destination of the journey, and a veritable paradise for toy-seeking children. The stage was set for this Saturday outing. The cast of players included Mom and Dad, bedecked in knee-length raincoats. Dad always drove, and Mom rode shotgun. The back seat was filled with 4 seat-beltless children, ranging in age from 1 to 11. Lynn, the oldest, rode behind Mom, while Keith, the second to oldest, rode behind Dad. And, as was the rule in the household, the 2 youngest and lowest in the pecking order, Eric and Alicia, were relegated to the middle of the back seat. This arrangement didn't bother Eric, however, as it afforded him copious amounts of attention by allowing him to be the center of activity. It was not uncommon for any of the children to lean over the front seat to feel more a part of the goings-on. Alicia, still a toddler, crawled all over the back seat, floorboard, underneath the back window, and over into the front seat and back again. Road trips such as these were precious, naive times. And so, this propitious adventure began with all the excitement such a trip merits. But it wasn't but a few miles before poor Eric began to complain of car sickness. This by no means was an inconceivable outcome, as active children, buoyed by the optimism of such an event, often become overwhelmed and overstimulated. Dad, I don't feel so well. I think I'm going to be sick. Eric, now tell me if you're going to vomit, and I'll pull over, Dad uttered alarmingly. But the point of stopping suddenly became moot as young Eric, seemingly searching for a place to vomit, pulled up over the front seat and dry heaved. Eric, get in the back! Dad shoved young Eric back into his place in the back seat. Trepidation was evident on the faces of his siblings, shocked at his green complexion and fearful of the realization that they might be laced with Eric's projectile vomiting. I told you, if you're going to be sick, I'll pull over. The car began to brake, but the gravity of the situation had reached critical mass. Young Eric, once again, perhaps seeking some solace from his parents, pulled up to the back of the front seat and spewed his gastric contents into the front seat between them, watching the yellow emulsion splatter indiscriminately on the seat and the knee-length raincoats that both his parents had on. God damn it, Eric! I told you to tell me! Dad's anger was evident. Not even the relief of purging the poison from his system could now assuage his nausea, for now he would face his father's ire. The car was now stopped on the side of the road. More yelling ensued, but young Eric didn't hear the words. He only saw his father's disappointment. The person whom he had sought out for consolation was now the object of his torment. Dad got out of the car and slammed the door shut as he moved toward the trunk. Usually, when the car stopped on the side of the road, meant Dad would free his belt from his pants to use it on misbehaving children. The silence inside the car's cabin was deafening. Dad pulled some rags from the trunk and opened up the door, still cursing the situation. Mom joined the cleanup effort, first wiping the sticky, stinky fluid from her trench coat. The nearby puddles on the side of the road turned out to be a blessing, as the rags were rinsed there several times during the toxic mop-up. The decision was made to go back home and put young Eric to bed. This resolution, whether it was punishment for young Eric or simple necessity for the needs of the many versus the needs of the one, brought the saga to its inevitable conclusion. Young Eric was awakened by the family later that day upon their return, but the Fairlane 500 smelled of puke for months afterward. This story may well have been forgotten forever had not young Eric been reminded constantly by his thankful siblings, who were spared from certain disaster that day by young Eric's altruistic decision to vomit into the front seat rather than into the back. The late 60s were indeed a time of turmoil. Chapter 8. Birthday Wishes Can Come True. "1968 was a year of assassinations. It would be a turbulent year for the Adams family. Dad was a high school principal in the nondescript town of Jay, Oklahoma, county seat of Delaware County. As had been the case with Dad throughout his life, his natural charisma and all-around good looks engendered him to the community as a natural leader and accomplished educator. Mom was also employed as a ninth-grade English teacher, a new role for her as a secondary education teacher. Before, she had always taught primary school, and one would often hear her complain about the aggressive attitude her ninth-grade students had with regard to authority. Attitude, like wisdom, is something that just occurs as a natural progression of aging in sophomore year for most, and it takes a different approach to manage young, testosterone-filled minds. She was just beginning to get a taste of it in her personal life. Her oldest of 4 children, Lynn, was a 7th grader. But her distinguished teaching career afforded her tools with which to engage even the most ill-mannered of students, and she would later carry this understanding into a career working with exceptional children. And so, in the course of the 1967 fall semester at Jay High School, there came to pass a change in the relationship of this model couple, one that would affect the nuclear fabric of the Adams family unit. It was decided that Dad would resign his post as principal and move to the bustling metropolis of Tulsa. He took a job selling New York life insurance, a seemingly good fit for him, considering his affable, gregarious nature, though he had never before ventured far from the teaching profession. The 4 children were unaware of the reasons for this change, and their mother remained taciturn on the subject, where her children were concerned. 1968 was beginning, and without Dad, the spring term began. The children dealt with the absence of their father as young children do, each in their own reflective way. Lynn, the oldest, probably internalized the breakup more than the inquisitive younger children, due to raging hormones and the confusion brought on by the onset of puberty, but were comforted by the never-ending love bestowed by their mother. She was an optimist, but in retrospect, the situation surely must have seemed dire at best. But through it all, she did all the things mothers do. getting them off to school each day after waking, dressing, and feeding them, attending the band concerts and open houses at school, taking them to church on Sundays and tucking them into bed each night, avoiding the constant query from the young ones of when Dad might return. Never might have been her first thought, or soon, I hope, might have been another, but she probably didn't really know the answer. Then, on a dreary Sunday in mid-April, 10 days after Martin Luther King had been shot, and just before the 7th birthday of their third child, young Eric, it happened. This Sunday was different. The Adams children were not awakened for church. They were allowed to sleep in. Young Eric rubbed the sleepy sand from his eyes and stretched, wondering why no one was getting ready for Sunday school. He shuffled his way from the middle bedroom, through the kitchen with the recognizable smell of brewing coffee, toward his mother's room at the far end of the trailer house. It seemed strange to young Eric that the door to her room was closed, as he'd become accustomed to the door being open since Dad's departure. There was something oddly comfortable about this closed door, and young Eric's eagerness to see behind it could not be subdued. As young Eric burst into the room, his eyes were wide with anticipation. Mom and Dad were propped up in bed, enjoying a cup of coffee, abruptly turning their attention from pillow talk to young Eric. "Dad, you're home!" It was as if he had never been away. Young Eric jumped into the middle of the bed between them, as he had done 100 times before. It was a wonderful, familiar feeling. "I have a birthday present for you." Dad brought out a sack from the other side of the bed. It was a 125-piece jigsaw puzzle. The picture was an animated picture of Batman, standing on a third-story building ledge in Gotham City, throwing his bat boomerang at Penguin, who was running away with a sack full of money he had just stolen from the First Gotham City Bank. Young Eric would end up putting that puzzle together 1,000 times, not because he liked puzzles, but because it reminded him of his parents' reconciliation. Birthdays came and went for him, but he always remembered the birthday he had in 1968. Chapter 9. They Live Among Us. The journey through life is fraught with dangers, and to most, we are completely oblivious. Sometimes we benefit from timing, like being late for a flight that crashes. Other times we benefit from providence, such as an assassin's bullet being stopped by a metal button on the victim's coat. Then, there are those rare occasions when the wrong time collides with the wrong place, and fate deals harshly with those involved, wreaking havoc and changing lives forever. But when heroism springs from meek hearts, history is written in the blink of an eye, and life is cherished like never before. It was a time of excitement for the children of Jay, Oklahoma. There was a spring carnival in town in 1968, replete with Ferris wheels, freak shows, cotton candy, and carnies. As far as the Adams children were concerned, it was the best thing to come along since Christmas, and was an affair not to be missed. Spirits soared as Keith and Eric headed out the door of the trailer house toward downtown, each with a generous advance on their allowance from Mom. The carnival atmosphere was in full swing when the boys arrived, offering everything they had imagined. The first thing they saw was a cotton candy vendor. It was fascinating to watch the man make it, as he poured the sugar in the middle and rolled up the feathery strands of candy onto white paper cones, creating bounteous helpings of blue substance that reminded young Eric of his Sunday school teacher's beehive hairdo. 15 cents seemed like a deal, and the two of them dissolved into the crowd, enjoying the sweet, sticky confection as they went. Distractions abound in such an environment. Distractions that can draw young, curious minds away. And after watching a clown juggle everything from balls to bowling pins, young Eric turned around to a sea of strangers. Keith was nowhere to be found. He scanned the unfamiliar faces around him, his uneasiness heightening as he began to search more earnestly, unsure whether his steps were leading him nearer or farther from his brother, his keeper. Panic now ruled his actions as he carelessly scrambled around an older lady, accidentally depositing what was left of his cotton candy on her naked arm. What's the big... He heard her yelling at him, but there was no time to stop. Until he found Keith, everything else was inconsequential. Eric was now close to despair. He had made it out to the periphery of the carnival, away from the spectacle and the people. He was about to give up hope when from around an old storage building, Keith emerged. He wasn't alone. The person behind him was Billy Newman, a local half-wit who was given to erratic behavior. He was 15 or 16, dressed in dirty, smelly clothes, with a face one might see on a wanted poster. Through no fault of his own, he was the product of a paper-thin gene pool, from a family lacking educational and socioeconomic standing. He was holding Keith's arm behind his back, forcing Keith to his knees from the pain he was inflicting. Ouch! Ouch! I'll break his arm. Billy wasn't kidding. Keith said nothing, but the tears in his eyes spoke volumes. Eric had to get help, and get it fast. Back to the crowd he ran, searching for someone to help with the desperate situation he had left behind him, knowing that he alone held the promise of Keith's future. The sea of strange faces around him only added to his fear, as he searched more and more ardently for a grown-up he could trust. Finally, out of desperation, he grabbed the strange hand of a well-dressed, middle-aged man standing near the lady whom Eric had soiled with his cotton candy 15 minutes earlier. That didn't matter. "Mister, please, my brother's in trouble. He might get his arm broken. Please!" Eric pulled him along with him. The man was hesitant at first, but the alarm in young Eric's voice prompted concern, and the man followed him back toward the old storage building. "He's right over here. I hope we're not too late." His adrenaline was surging as they neared the building. At first, there was no sign of Keith or Billy, but as they started around the far side, Keith walked out unharmed, with only a button missing from his shirt. Welcoming relief came quickly to young Eric, secure in the knowledge that he and his brother were once again free to enjoy life and pursue happiness together. The events of that day would endure for young Eric throughout his life. His actions could be construed as selfless, acting for the benefit of another human being, when, in reality, he did what he did only out of fear for his own emotional well-being. The real hero of this story was a man remaining nameless to this day, whose well-meaning intentions not only saved the life of a 10-year-old boy, but in the process preserved the posterity of the Addams family forever.